Hey everyone, welcome to the Optispan podcast. In today's episode, what I want to do is talk about a concept that I've been toying around with for a while now. I've talked about it a couple times, what I call medicine 4.0. And this really is, an extension of what Peter Attia has referred to as medicine 3.0. And Peter's a friend of mine. I think he has been the leading voice in this space. And so a lot of my thinking here has developed directly from content that Peter has put out in conversations that we've had. And so Peter sort of frames this as medicine 1.0 would be, humors and leeches, not very scientific approaches to health. Medicine 2.0 is where we are now and really where we've been for at least the last 100 years. It starts with the application of the scientific method to the practice of medicine. And it has evolved into what I refer to as reactive disease care. So, we've made pretty big strides in increasing life expectancy in developed nations between about 1850 and 1990, largely due to improvements in sanitation, reductions in childhood mortality, the development of and widespread use of antibiotics. And that has led to a large fraction of the population living long enough that they develop one, often multiple significant diseases that then ultimately lead to mortality. And our entire biomedical enterprise is centered around waiting until people are sick and then trying to do something about those diseases. And so from very, very basic preclinical research to biomedical, early stage biotechnology companies to late stage pharmaceutical companies to clinical practice, the vast majority of effort and resources goes towards diagnosing and ultimately treating symptoms of disease. And we typically study those diseases and think about them in isolation. And it's in reaction to people developing the diseases. That's where the reactive disease care comes from. Medicine 3.0 is the next evolution in healthcare towards proactive, evidence-based, personalized healthcare. And I think the opportunities here are enormous. And this is really what Peter and others in this space spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about. And so I've been really thinking about, can medicine 3.0 get us where we want to be, or at least get us to where we should be given the tools that we have available today? And I don't think it can. And that's where medicine 4.0 comes in. And so what I want to do now is really take you through this evolution in my thinking and how some of the opportunities I see for us to go maybe skip over medicine 3.0 and go right to medicine 4.0. So to start though, again, I want to emphasize that medicine 2.0 is reactive disease care. It's focused on individual diseases in isolation. And there are some consequences to the predominance of this reactive disease care approach in the healthcare industry. So one way to think about this is, where are we today as a society in terms of population lifespan or life expectancy, survival, and how does that compare to population health span or health? And it's very difficult to accurately quantify health, but we can really accurately quantify survival. And so these curves are pretty close. I'm certainly not going to argue that they are perfect or that they are based on very well mapped out quantitative data. In the case of survival, we know what median life expectancy is depending on the organization you get the data from. In the United States, it varies between 77.5 and 80.2 years. We know what the kinetics of population mortality are. We can develop a very precise survival curve. Among the information that we have a pretty good evidence that life expectancy in the United States and other developed countries is decelerating and really has perhaps plateaued in the United States. So it's a very good paper from J. Olshansky and colleagues recently that we just did an episode on the podcast about that really looks into this deceleration of life expectancy. So I would encourage you to check that episode out. But this is in stark contrast to what has gone on, really throughout the most of the 20th century, where there were pretty significant increases in life expectancy on the order of 3 years of added life expectancy for every decade that passed. That has slowed down a lot and maybe has stopped. I think there's a lot of debate around what the reason is. Why has the increase in life expectancy slowed, but I'm definitely of the opinion that that's probably going to continue to be the case unless we have development of fundamentally new geroscience applications. And we talked a bit about that in the podcast episode on the life expectancy paper. And obviously, we've talked about potential geroscience interventions a lot on the podcast. So I'm not going to go into more depth there. But we can also then ask the question, what does health look like at the population level in the United States? And this is a little bit harder to quantify in a very precise way. But we do know that the median age of the United States is 38.8 years. And the CDC estimates that 60% of Americans roughly have at least one chronic disease. And so if we define health or health span as the absence of chronic disease or significant disability, an imperfect definition without doubt, but perhaps useful for today's exercise, we can develop a pretty reasonable health curve. That's what's shown in red. And when we do that, it's quite striking the disparity between health and survival in the United States. And so that gap is what I refer to as sick span, the period of life that individuals spend with at least one significant chronic disease or disability. And it's probably roughly half of lifespan in the United States based on these definitions. That is increasing, and that is a direct consequence of the reactive disease care industry. We have done a very, very good job of keeping sick people alive. We have done a very, very shitty job of keeping people healthy at the population level. Certainly there are individual exceptions to that, but at the population level, it's unclear whether health span is decreasing or stable, but without a doubt, sick span is increasing and has increased over the past decades. This accounts for about 90% of healthcare expenditures. Treating people with chronic disease accounts for about 90% of healthcare expenditures. Again, that's the reactive disease care industry as it exists today. As you've heard before, if you've followed the podcast, I don't believe that's sustainable. We need to change the approach to healthcare. And Peter has presented a vision for Medicine 3.0, which is really about pushing this health curve out as far as possible. And Medicine 3.0 fundamentally is Medicine 2.0. You still need to take care of sick people, for sure. I'm not arguing against that. There will always be sickness and disease, and we need Medicine 2.0 to take care of sick people and hopefully alleviate their symptoms and in some cases even cure their disease. But that's not enough. We also need proactive approaches to keep people healthy. Proactive screening is a big part of that. Personalized biomarkers is a big part of that. Lifestyle modifications and tools to enable people to maintain behavioral modifications are critically important. That's the best opportunity we have today to maximize health span. But then on top of that, appropriate use of medication and supplements. And I think Peter does a fantastic job of really laying out his vision for Medicine 3.0 in his book, Outlive, which I would encourage everybody to check out. I will say, I'm convinced that that's insufficient to achieve this goal, to really compress sick span to, 5 years, let's say. I don't think that those approaches are going to be sufficient to get us there. I don't think Medicine 3.0 is enough. And I think we have some tools that fall outside of Medicine 3.0 that we can bring to bear to accomplish this goal. And those tools are really rooted in two areas. I think a more significant focus on geroscience, which is the connection between aging biology and age-related functional declines in disease. And Peter absolutely talks about geroscience, but I think we need a far more focused approach to geroscience incorporated into Medicine 3.0. And then I think we need also to be thinking about the ways that the new artificial intelligence tools that are coming online can be applied in the most effective way to maximize health span and get us as close to this optimal as we possibly can. So that's what I think of as Medicine 4.0. It's Medicine 3.0, which again still includes reactive disease care, includes proactive screening, biomarkers, lifestyle modifications, medications, supplements, new therapies that are coming online, but with a much more emphasis placed on targeting the biology of aging directly, understanding to what extent for individuals are we effectively targeting the biology of aging, and using artificial intelligence in ways that will make those things much more effective at the population and individual level. Okay, so why do I say geroscience is important? So again, if we go back to the reactive disease care approach, which is thinking about individual diseases in isolation, if you look at the major diseases that cause death and disability in the United States, they all have a single greatest risk factor. And that single greatest risk factor isn't what you eat. It's not whether you have high blood pressure. It's not whether you smoke. It's not how much alcohol you consume. It's how old you are, right? So aging is really the driver for every major disease, most major causes of death and disability in the United States. In fact, if you look at the top 10 causes of death in the United States, 9 of them have age as their greatest risk factor. The only one that doesn't is accidents, and under accidents is lumped opiates and other deaths due to addictive drugs. So age is really the driving factor for things that kill most people in the United States. It's also the driving factor for things that limit quality of life for most people in the United States. And if we can understand that biology that underlies the aging process, that gives us the opportunity to delay the onset and progression of all of these functional declines and diseases simultaneously. I believe that targeting the biology of aging is necessary for Medicine 4.0. It may not be sufficient, but it's necessary for Medicine 4.0. It's useful also to appreciate how necessary it is. So I've already said Medicine 2.0 focuses on individual diseases in isolation, and to the extent that Medicine 2.0 incorporates preventative approaches, they're all centered around risk factors that have effect sizes of, somewhere between 50% increase in risk and maybe 2 to 3-fold increase in risk. Things like alcohol consumption, smoking, obesity, super important, high blood pressure. In some cases, we know about genetic predispositions, like in the case of Alzheimer's disease, things like the ApoE gene, which can increase your risk. Again, all of those things increase risk somewhere between about 50% and at the high end, 4-fold increase in risk. Those are important. But if we compare that to the increase in risk that goes along with 4 decades of getting older, it's just dwarfed, right? At least an order of magnitude, in some cases, 2 orders of magnitude difference between 4 decades of biological aging and all of the other risk factors combined. So I'm not saying those other risk factors aren't important, but if you really want to focus on what's going to move the needle, modulating the biology of aging is going to move the needle way more than these other risk factors that we spend most of our time thinking about, to the extent that we think about risk factors at all and don't just wait until people are sick before we do anything, okay? So that's how Medicine 4.0 thinks about disease. Recognizes that biological aging is by far the most important thing we can modulate to keep people healthy, keep them from getting these diseases of aging for as long as possible. Medicine 4.0 is much, much, much more impactful than Medicine 2.0 in just about every way you look at it. But one way to look at it is by looking at life expectancy. And again, this is work that J.L. Shansky, who I've already mentioned in this episode, did a couple of decades ago now by asking a very simple question. What happens if we take the typical 50-year-old woman in the United States at that time and we cure cancer? So we look across the population, we get rid of all forms of cancer. For a typical 50-year-old woman in the United States, that gives about a 3-year increase in life expectancy. You can do the same exercise with heart disease. Just take it out of the equation. Get about 3 years increase in life expectancy. You cure both cancer and heart disease, the 2 leading causes of death in the United States for the last 50 years. Get rid of them. Typical 50-year-old woman gets about 7 years of added life expectancy. So that's not insignificant, but it's probably not as big as most people would assume. And especially when you consider the vast majority of resources that goes to biomedical research has been aimed squarely at the war on cancer or curing heart disease, right? In isolation. And I think we can have an honest debate about how effective those resources have been at accomplishing those goals. Certainly there have been strides, but we haven't cured either one of those things. In fact, the 2 leading causes of death in the United States 50 years ago were heart disease and cancer. The 2 leading causes of death today are heart disease and cancer. Okay, so it's really, really hard to cure disease at the population level. Now, if we compare that to the effect of slowing aging, and this is routine in laboratory animals, I'm not going to pretend we can do this in people today or that we can prove we can do this in people today, but let's just say that we could, that that the biology of aging is conserved enough that we can target aging in people effectively. You get a much larger increase in life expectancy, maybe as much as 2 to 3 decades, with the added value that those years are spent in relatively good health, free from chronic disease and disability. This is hypothetical, right? I'm not suggesting we can do this today. In fact, I would suggest we can't do this today, but I do think it's possible for us to do this, and maybe in the not too distant future. So that's the case for geroscience and why we need to spend a significant amount of our effort on applying geroscience to keep people healthy. What about artificial intelligence? And this is a little bit harder, of course, to predict where artificial intelligence is going to evolve in the future. But I think anybody who's paying attention recognizes that there's an enormous potential for the use of AI-based tools in biomedical research, and I believe in health optimization in particular. There are at least 3 use cases that I'm particularly interested in and that we are working on right now at Optispan. One is the development of more sophisticated, more integrated biomarker signatures, or what many people call biological age clocks. Okay, so right now we've got biological age clocks. Most of them focus on one modality, maybe it's epigenetics, one part of the hallmarks of aging. I think there are opportunities to integrate a variety of different data types and develop much more sophisticated estimates of risk and current health status using these AI tools and large data sets that are being collected and developed. So that's a pretty obvious use case. No question, there will be better biomarker signatures and panels coming fast and furious in the next 5 to 10 years. I also think there are real opportunities to apply artificial intelligence to new intervention discovery and personalized interventions. So understanding how individuals are currently what their health span trajectory is and how to optimize their health span. And then on the research side, discovering even better interventions than we've got today. And if you have good biomarker signatures, validating those interventions at the individual level. And then the third area, and one that I'm really interested in, is the development of these what I call personalized health span agents. I think we're not very far off from all of us having AI agents that can effectively help improve our health. And there's a variety of ways these can be used, a variety of ways they can evolve. What I envision is a health span agent that has access to all of our biomarker data, information about our real-time sort of health status, so wearable information, potentially information about our mental health, about our nutrition, exercise, sleep quality, relationships, transcripts of conversations with your doctor, your coach, your loved ones, all of that information being available to that health span agent to provide different types of insights. And again, I realize this sounds, maybe a little bit far-fetched, but the reality is we're already doing this in our programs at Optispan. And the insights have surprised me. So I really do believe that this is coming. And if done right, there's opportunity for very powerful monitoring and behavior modification that is facilitated by these AI agents. And so I think that this potentially could have a pretty big impact to help people optimize their health or get closer to an optimal health span trajectory more or less in real time by having an agent that's there 24/7. And so I'm encouraged and enthusiastic about the use of AI in that way. So there are many other use cases, but I think these are 3 obvious ways where tools that currently exist or will exist in the very near future can be used to have an impact on health span optimization and potentially increasing longevity. I'm pretty optimistic that we can employ Medicine 4.0 now And over the next few years, it will evolve into something that can start to get us close to that optimal health span trajectory. I think the interesting question is, can we do better than that? Can we take the survival curve today, optimize health, and then push both of them out significantly, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? I don't know the answer to that question. I think if you understood that paper from J.L. Shansky recently looking at life expectancy, and again, we just recently did an episode on the podcast about this, it seems as though that's going to be difficult. Certainly, given the tools that we are employing today, the answer is clearly no. If we take the geroscience tools that we have available today, we optimize lifestyle factors, it's unclear. My intuition is we're not going to push life expectancy out a lot, maybe a decade. Health span, I think we can definitely get closer to that optimal health curve that I've talked about with Medicine 4.0. Life expectancy, I still don't think we're going to have huge impacts. And I think if you really dive into the math in that paper, it's quite difficult to really move the needle to a large extent on life expectancy. So my guess is lifestyle modification alone, almost certainly not. Current generation 1 geroscience interventions, probably not, but it's a little bit hard to know because we just don't have the data. My guess is 10 years is probably going to be the upper limit there, maybe more. But I think if we really want to move beyond Medicine 4.0, optimizing health span without having large effects on survival, we're going to need to do something else. And that's Medicine 5.0, right? Why not just keep going up, keep getting better? So how do we get to Medicine 5.0? And I think one of the things we need to do as a field is stop looking under the lamppost, stop focusing on what we think we know about the biology of aging, and start focusing on what we don't know, right? Because again, my intuition is pretty much everything that everybody's studying today targets the same network. And that's the network that underlies what we currently understand about the hallmarks of aging. And you're only going to be able to get so far by tweaking that network. And I think that's why we aren't seeing significantly better interventions in terms of effects on longevity in preclinical studies and laboratory animals, because everybody's optimizing the same network, and you can only optimize it so far. And so far, we can best optimize the network with 60% caloric restriction, right? So I think we're not going to get substantially beyond that unless we start looking outside the lamppost and doing more discovery science. And I think there are multiple ways, again, that this can be accomplished. I'm really focused on a couple. I think we want to do unbiased discovery science. I think one way to approach that is through new animal models. Those could be models that age more rapidly, but have things like the human environment at their core that we don't study in laboratories, or they can be animals that age really, really slowly or really, really well, right? Like clams that can live 500 years, or animals that appear to have what we call negligible senescence. In other words, their mortality does not increase exponentially as a function of age. And understanding the mechanisms that underlie that exceptional aging. Those studies are hard to do, but we really as a field haven't put very many resources towards studying the aging process in those really interesting animal models, and more can be done there. The other approach, which I've talked about before on the podcast, is to develop tools to allow massively high throughput longevity drug discovery, unbiased approaches where we don't go in with preconceived notions that mTOR is important or AMP kinase is important or whatever pathway we think is important. We just let the biology tell us, and we can do that because we can look at 1 million different things or 10 million different things. And that, in my personal opinion, is really the place where there's the biggest bang for the buck right now, because the technology already exists. And that's what we're doing at Aura Biomedical. But I think I would like to see more people start taking this approach of really trying to ask, what's undiscovered out there? How do we look for things that we don't already know about? How do we do it in an unbiased way so we're not looking under the lamppost, but exploring a lot more of the intervention space, and preferably able to explore combinations of interventions. That could be multiple genetic interventions or multiple drugs or a combination. Those are the kinds of things I think give us the best opportunity to get beyond where we're at today in terms of life expectancy and move towards a more significant increases in life expectancy and healthspan at the same time. So that's what I call medicine 5.0, at least for now. And apologies to Peter for, taking his medicine 3.0 and building on it, but I really like the phrase. So as we all know, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. Huge respect for Peter, and I hope he's not upset with me for building on his ideas. So anyways, that's kind of what I've been thinking about here. And as always, would love any comments or questions that you have. These ideas are certainly works in progress. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope to see you next time on the Optispan podcast.